I'm Linda Lorelle, creator and host of Our Voices Matter. Why this podcast and why now? Because it's time for us all to take a deep breath and listen. I am a journalist, business owner, keynote speaker, founder of an education nonprofit, wife, mother, daughter, sister, dancer, and lover of life and my country. And like so many of you, I am deeply distressed at the deteriorating level of discourse in our democracy. This podcast is my humble attempt to do something about it, one story at a time. It is my hope that as you listen to and watch the stories of someone you might consider to be the other, that you will somehow see a glimpse of yourself and be reminded of our common humanity. So what do you say? Let's take this journey together. This episode is sponsored by the Bilateral Chamber of Commerce, an exclusive membership-based network of international business leadership. The Chamber develops and advances strategic global connections to foster business opportunities that lead to economic growth for companies looking to succeed in the global economy. Welcome to this episode of Our Voices Matter. Very excited to have with us Ruby Powers of the Powers Law Firm. Ruby, I'm so glad that we're having this conversation. So Ruby is an immigration attorney. And not just any immigration attorney. She's one of the go-to people. I was talking to somebody the other day and they said, yeah, we always send people to Ruby because she's right in the thick of it. So tell us how you are involved in the whole immigration debate right now with your clients. How are things going? I would imagine you're very busy.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's quite an honor. I've been in immigration I've been a practicing immigration attorney for 10 years. And so I've learned so much in the last 10 years, but in the last couple of years, it's been very different. It seems to be more of a bit of an anti-immigrant sentiment, and processing times are taking longer. Everything just seems to be a little bit more difficult, and there's lots of changes at a moment's notice. Everything from family separation that really caught a lot of us off guard last summer to government shutdown impacting immigration, and generally every year before it became this sort of hostile, I guess you could say, our goal was to try to get immigration reform. We were trying to be progressively trying to find a solution so that we wouldn't be dealing with what we're having to deal with right here. And I feel like that conversation hasn't been as prevalent in the last couple of years because we've been more of like in a defensive mode, trying to make sure our clients don't get deported or trying to fight for programs that are trying to be taken away at a moment's notice.
So what was the conversation that you were having a couple of years prior to these last two? What were those conversations like?
So I've only practiced law under two presidents, Obama and Trump. Under President Obama, we were given a lot of notice about any change. Maybe 6 months, 12 months. It allowed us time to change our strategy, notify our client, and adapt because we had enough time. And then we also could talk about it was a little bit more calm in that respect, that we could talk about what would be ways to improve the system. Under President Obama, we received DACA, for example, what a lot of people call for the Dreamers. And that's just sort of the framework it was. Under President Trump, it's been a lot of constant changes. I mean, it started off with the travel ban in January of 2017, and it really hasn't stopped since then. And, I think we're at travel ban 3.0, and there's family separation, government shutdowns. We have DACA, we don't have DACA. Then what lawsuits going on at the time? It's really confusing. Eating away at asylum law under Attorney General Sessions last summer, or most of last year, trying to take away provisions for victims of domestic violence in asylum or those victims of gangs. So it's just like it's almost like whack-a-mole right now. It's like there's something over here with employment, investment, naturalizations taking longer, citizenship, asylum. It's exhausting, honestly.
Yeah. So you spend some time at the border. You have clients and that sometimes will necessitate that you go to the border. What are you seeing there?
Well, I went a lot to the border last year because I was working on some pro bono cases, specifically after there was a zero tolerance policy where they split the parents from the children. It started in May 2018, and it didn't end until June 20th with the executive order of 2018. So that's why I was there a couple of times, and I sent my associate as well. We were there mostly to help give our aid legal advice, because people not only were applying for asylum in the tumultuous times where the case law was being changed almost unilaterally by the then Attorney General, but also they were traumatized by their children being ripped away from them.
Did you have clients whose children were taken from them?
Of course, I did. I took care, I still have a couple of them right now that I took all the way from the detention centers. Now they've been released and they've been reunited, and I'm working through their cases. But also, it was like a legal relay race. It was like, I don't know, we were all legal first responders. We were coming to the aid. Most of us run our own businesses, have small children, are busy. We can't drop everything for months on end. So I would go for a couple of days, somebody else would tag team and take care of a case, and we would communicate with each other over text and WhatsApp and email and try to help as many people as we could. And a lot of attorneys were swooping in from around the country down to our border in Texas to help others. And so I might have helped out in a small way by help connect them with an attorney or give them advice or help out with a hearing. But in the long run, I've helped reunify at least 2 families directly, where I flew down there, reunified them, and later have taken on the case since then.
That must have been very rewarding.
It was difficult times, and I think whenever I think about that summer, it puts me in a place where it's hard to keep my composure, but it has been really
Why?
rewarding.
Tell me, what was going on there from an emotional standpoint?
Well, I think it's very inhumane to rip children from parents. I don't see what they did wrong. I mean, all of a sudden they just created this procedure, this process it was really to discourage people from applying for asylum, which I believe is against any particular law, asylum, human rights, and I think that we still don't know, what the result's going to be about the U.S.'s actions in doing so. And actually, they're still separating to this day, but it's not in the same numbers, and it's not getting as much attention.
So separations are still happening?
There are, because there's ways that you can consider a child an unaccompanied minor, and I think that there's not as much oversight. But, and so that it still is happening. And there's also people who were separated last summer that still are being reunited still to this day, which I think is just horrific. I'm hearing stories of children having major PTSD and separation anxiety. I mean, I think the years from now we'll have more information of how that trauma impacted the children in such formative years, and their learning and, attachment. But I mean, as a mother of 2 small children, as a human, it was traumatizing, because I went into Port Azil Detention Center it was right after the executive order had been announced that they were going to quit separating. But it was right before I found out about the ACLU's litigation, the Miss L case, that said that it was the government's duty to reunify all the children within 15 to 30 days. So I went in, I didn't know that had just happened, because I was in a detention facility without any information and phones and electronics and internet. And most of the time I spent thinking I was going to talk about their case, I really just listened to them being traumatized about their separation and how they were lied to when the children were taken away from them. They were told that they would be there when they came back, and they weren't. And I just heard so many horrific stories, but it was very consistent that the children were lied to, the parents were lied to. And it took almost a week and a half or 2 weeks, maybe even 3, before many of the parents were able to talk to their children. And imagine the logistics of children being in detention and parents being in detention. They couldn't, you play phone tag in a busy schedule, try playing phone tag where 2 people are in detention. It took a lot of work to get them to be able to communicate with each other. But in a room that was right next to me through a glass window, I started seeing some of the parents the guard was calling the child and giving the phone to the parent, and the faces just.
It's hard. It's really hard.
And you could tell that they were talking to their child for probably the first time after having all of that happen to them. And so, on one hand, I'm a human, a mom, and, trying to, all of those things. And then on the other hand, I'm an immigration attorney, and I'm trying to get to the root of their case. And it's like, okay, tell me what happened, and let's try to figure out how we can prepare you for your case ahead, because I might be the only attorney they had the opportunity to speak to. And I was going in there pro bono. I mean, that's most of the people there had no resources to afford an attorney, and the statistics show that if you don't have an attorney when you're in asylum application, you have a very, very little chance of winning. So I knew I was maybe their only hope for at least, even if it had 30 minutes, 60 minutes, to be able to talk with them. So it was an emotional experience, and I still relive it when I talk about that story, but also when I work with my clients who've overcome that. And I really want to make sure that that story never is forgotten, that the U.S. government did that in 2018, and I think is still doing it on a very small scale with little oversight.
How is this possible? How did we get here?
Oh, you're asking a lot of tough questions.
I know.
I mean, how?
It's just so.
I think that we're being distracted on many different levels, and the advocates who care about immigration are being overwhelmed. On one hand, asylum law was being changed with the matter of A/B. Then there was wait times, and then there was a new attorney general, another secretary of state. There were policy change after policy change, and like I mentioned, under the Obama years, we were generally given enough time to take it in, analyze it, think of all our hundreds of clients we have, and figure out how that will apply to them. But those who are working tirelessly for immigrants in all different levels, from nonprofits to NGOs to attorneys to other groups, I think we're just really overwhelmed and we're being bombarded. But I mean, so it's harder for us to fight, but it's a constant battle. And I'm really grateful to lots of different groups who are constantly working hard to keep the government in check.
So you are literally in the trenches in this debate, and you are seeing the impact on human lives every single day. Based on what you see and your perspective as an immigration attorney, what do you think is the answer to some sort of comprehensive immigration reform? I mean, nobody wants open borders where anybody gets to come in just because they want to. I don't think anybody's advocating that, but there has to be a better way to go about this so that children and parents are not literally ripped apart. What do you think are some of the steps that we as a nation and our Congress and our president can take together to mitigate this situation?
Well, the answer that there's lots of different aspects to that. In many cases, I've always been wanting to get comprehensive immigration reform because you want to look at the big picture. And I think that's really hard practically for that to get passed. A lot of times what gets passed are little stopgaps that later on become, or little band-aids that become bottlenecks later on. One case in point was in 1996-97, there was a passing of a bill called IRA, a law. And basically the idea was to keep people from coming in by having a consequence of overstaying. Well, it actually had the reverse effect. Because it was so dangerous to overstay or to leave after overstaying, most people never left. And that's why we have about 11 million or so, whatever the number is right now, of people who've either entered legally and overstayed or maybe entered and never left.
Because it was more dangerous for them to leave.
It was almost insurmountable for them to be able to come back in some legal fashion because a bar was made of unlawful presence of a 1 year, a 10-year, or maybe a permanent bar. if they left
If they
after
left.
overstaying. So there wasn't a lot of opportunity for forgiveness. So there's that law that's sort of in the framework in the background that a lot of people see. There's not enough visas in some cases for employment-based cases. The H-1Bs comes up in mind. It's in H-1B season at the beginning of every year. I think what's also happening is there's a lot of processing backlogs. I think for solutions, you've got to find a way to help the people like the dreamers. For example, we need to have some solution there because those children came, and they're not children anymore. They're in their 30s and they have children almost somewhere in middle school potentially, and they're part of the bedrock of our communities, especially in California and Texas. They need to have stability because they don't even know where to build their home on. It's like building on sand because they don't know what their status is going to be. And the last couple of years, it's been a lot of you have it or you don't. DACA's been in litigation. So the dreamers need a solution, but you also need to find a way for the 10 or 11 million people who've overstayed or in some capacity or are not in status, because there isn't really a simple fix. A couple years, in the early 2000s, there was a law that said if you filed a petition by a certain date and you paid a fine, that basically you could still proceed. There needs to be some type of way for them to have a waiver or forgiveness to be able to overcome those very draconian laws from 1996-97 that created a lot of roadblocks for people. And I think just in general, there's just so many different facets, but I don't think we need to also change the hire American, buyer American. That's very anti-international minded, and we need to make the U.S. more of a place that's open to bright young minds who want to come to the United States and for new technologies and new industries. I mean, who's to say we know everything? We should attract that talent to the United States and make it easier for them.
What do you say to the people, I was going to say on the far right, but really anyone who believes that what has been happening at the border is the right thing in terms of detaining people and the way that the current administration has really made this issue front and center and has really cracked down on how we were doing things in the past. What's your message?
It's hard to answer that because there's lots of different things that have been changing in just the last 12 months or so. But in general, under President Obama, there were a lot of deportations but there still was a lot more opportunity, I think, for people who entered to still go through the process to apply and just see what they were eligible for. Now things have been a lot more difficult in terms of the case law changes for asylum, but also when people what's happening right now is the Remain in Mexico policy. And what they're saying is that they won't allow, they're limiting the amount of people that it could enter at a port of entry without a visa. They're metering. That's been more prevalent the last couple of years. But also those who do come that way, they're planning and have for a few people send them back to Mexico to wait for their case to be pending. I think in general, I would say there's not more people coming than there haven't been in the past. I think a lot of this has been exaggerated and created into some manufactured chaos that's trying to attract attention and say that this is an emergency. You'll see city after city on the border, mayors and sheriffs and reps and senators say that this is not an emergency. It's not like it's been before, and in fact, there's less numbers. It's just that it's getting more attention and using words like caravan and emergency and border wall and things like that. I think the one thing we owe anyone is the opportunity to go through a reasonably dignified due process for them to be reviewed for their eligibility for a form of relief. And if they're not eligible, sure, I understand, they can't stay. But if they are, they should be given that opportunity.
And during the process to keep the humanity in place.
Right. Not be in freezing rooms and not be in cages and not be separated from their children And I mean, that's just the start of it. We're not even talking about, what is it, like $15 tubes of toothpaste and the phone calls. Even with my clients, I'll have to put the money on their account to even talk to them. You know, it's very expensive just to even communicate with detainees.
Wow. You are clearly very passionate about this. What is driving you? Why did you go into immigration law?
Well, I always start with my maternal grandparents were American missionaries in Mexico, because I think that helps explain the lens that I see the world from. They were very service-oriented. They gave their whole lives to the ministry. I grew up in the summers in Mexico. My mom was born in Mexico. Spanish was her first language. I had the luxury of seeing the world from two countries' point of view, the United States and Mexico. And then later on, I had the opportunity to travel with Rotary as an exchange student to Belgium. I learned French in a few months. It was crazy, and that was before internet was so all over the place, and I really had to learn to really live in a new culture, and I couldn't just call home every day. And so between the service background of my grandparents, an international background of the family, but also my travels, later living in Belgium and in Turkey and Spain, it just made sense. Like, how could I combine business? I have my own law firm. Human rights, I help those who need and who are fleeing from horrible things around the world. And government, you know, I'm helping navigate policies and laws. And so when I look back at some of my applications in high school, that's what I said I wanted to do, and that's what I'm doing. And I didn't really know what that would look like, but here I am doing exactly what I thought I was going to do as a teenager. And I want to give back to those who need the most help, those who can't help defend themselves. And so in a way, having on the other side, they were farmers and business owners, and so I'm a combination: service, international relations, and an entrepreneur.
You're doing what you were put on this earth to do. I can see it. I mean, you radiate it, and it's really beautiful to see that you're living exactly what you feel, and you're living your, I guess your priorities. You know, it's really quite remarkable. Is there a particular case that stands out in your mind that is one that you'll never forget, or that's been the most rewarding? Or, I mean, is there anything that comes to mind?
Well, there's a lot of great cases, and I always have to be careful about giving too much detail.
Sure.
But, you know, I have a love-hate relationship with asylum. My love is that I can help people in dire need overcome situations, whether from governments or their political opinion or their gender, race, and be able to overcome be able to find a new life. And one thing that I've really enjoyed is really helping women asylum seekers. I mean, I love helping all those. And the hate part is the fact that it's just so emotionally draining, and you're not sure if you're going to win, and you get so involved with their case. But in general, I try to stay positive. So what I feel like was one of my missions is to help women who generally are in more of a difficult situation around the world when they're applying for asylum here in the United States, so that with the goal that they can become leaders and thought leaders for other generations in their home country, in whatever respect that may be, from being authors or bloggers, or maybe one day, if it's safe for them to go back to their country, to be a leader in some other respect.
You speak like a leader. Do you think politics are in your future?
Well, I think that I feel like it's a natural inclination of mine. I used to work for the Committee on Homeland Security in DC, and I've interned in DC and in Austin, and I just realized, I not only having the formal education of a government major or a law degree, and having worked with the government, but I also need to go back and I need to go home and see work in the field and see how things run. And having been a business owner, having been an attorney and a mother and 2 small children, I feel like I'm more equipped now than I was before of knowing how I can help better serve my community. So I think that it's possible in the future. It's just a matter of probably of timing.
Timing, yeah. Well, when you're ready to declare, whatever that turns out to be, please break the news here.
Oh,
please
okay.
let me know.
Okay,
I would love
exciting.
to. Yeah. I just, you're going places. I mean, we've become friends over the last couple of years, but the more that I get to know you and the more that I talk to you and see your passion and see how you're living it, I just am so impressed with what you're doing and how you're trying to give a voice to those who don't often have it. So.
Well, I feel like it's my duty to do that. I don't know. It's just like I have a drive, and I just have to keep on keeping on, and just I feel like I'm trying to be the voice for those who can't be. Whether it's an undocumented immigrant or a battered woman or someone fleeing from a country that they can't speak up about. And so I just feel like that's my duty, and so I'm grateful for this opportunity to be able to do what I'm doing.
And how you're modeling for your children.
That's true. I think about them regularly and how I want them to be proud and know that this is normal and this is what they should do too. Because I learned a lot from my grandparents and my parents, and I want them to see that in me as well.
I'm so glad that we took time to chat with you today. This is really inspiring. And, when I started the podcast, I was pretty clear when I put all the information out that I did not want this show to be about politics. And this is probably as close to political as we've gotten so far, just because, but the whole point is we have to be able to talk within the context of what's going on politically. But the idea here is to be able to talk about and share the stories, whatever they are, from all spectrums, so that we can get to know each other better and we can see each other's point of view. Maybe people who are listening don't necessarily agree with everything you said as it relates to immigration, but the bottom line is we're all human beings, and we've got to be able to look at things through that lens. And I think you articulated that so beautifully.
Well, thank you. And I think immigration is really complex, so it's really hard to have like a 5-minute conversation with just anyone who maybe doesn't really know all the background. And it does get politicized so quickly. It's a bit challenging because people seem to go into the conversation with a mindset. And I'm open-minded. I see it from having gone through the process with my husband and my mother as well. And
your husband is from Turkey.
He's from Turkey, right? And so we went through the whole government immigration process where we went to an interview, and we didn't have an attorney at the time, so we watched the movie Green Card or something.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh!
Don't do that. No tips to my clients.
Right.
And the funny thing was the interview, like she was so distracted by something that she thought I was the foreigner.
Wow.
I was the petitioner. And anyway, so that's what I also bring to the table, is that having, my mom was born in Mexico, a lot of my cousins and uncles and aunts have been born in foreign countries. Most of my family are my clients. True story. And having gone through it with my husband, that helps give me a whole nother level of empathy for my clients as well.
Love that word, empathy. We all need more of it. We truly do. Is there anything else that you'd like to add that I haven't given you a chance to say?
I feel like we need to get the conversation about like what you had asked me, how do we fix this? Because I feel like that hasn't been part of the conversation for a while. And I go to Austin for bills. I'm going to be there in March to help talk to the state legislature about immigration, and I'm going to DC in April to try to talk about reform and changes. And I think we just need to keep that conversation going, because no matter what, whether it's this administration or the next, somehow we will need to get some type of change with immigration, because it's not going away. In fact, it's just getting worse if we just keep ignoring it. So I hope that we can, in the future, find some type of a solution, and I think it needs to happen soon.
Well, I've no doubt that you're going to be a big part of that. I really do,
Well, I hope
because
I
you
can
have
be.
such unique perspectives, and you bring such a big, beautiful heart to the table, and that's really appreciated. Thank you so much, Ruby. And I love that you said, you know, you have an open mind, and that's what we ask our viewers and listeners to do, to have an open mind as we give our guests permission to speak. So thank you for watching and for listening, and we'll see you next time. If the mission of Our Voices Matter resonates with you, please like, subscribe, download, and share, and then join the conversation, because it really is going to take all of us to make a difference.